Okay, here's my review of the Lenovo Legion 7. This one is a 2024 model, has the RTX 4090, and has the Intel Core i9 14900HX. So I know I've been doing a whole bunch of different type of videos, just trying to diversify my audience, but I don't want to ignore my core audience, which is gaming laptops. So I did a poll asking which laptop you guys wanted me to cover next, and overwhelmingly, you guys chose the Lenovo 7. So let's just get right into it. I will say though that after using several different types of laptops, including my personal P16 laptop and even like the G16 with some of those more efficient CPUs, my opinion has really changed on these traditionally large and power heavy laptops. A lot, actually. But before I get into all those details, as always, let's start off with the build and the design. And I realize that I've done this before. This is identical to last year's model. It's essentially just a spec bump. So if you do want to see that video that I did last year, I'll leave it down below. But really quickly, really well made laptop. I mean, I expect no less from Lenovo. So you're getting an all metal build on the top lid and on the back. There is some plastic at the back here, but I think that's important to make sure that it doesn't get too hot to the touch because this is where all the exhaust is. And love it or hate it, I go back and forth. Most of the ports are at the back. And I will point out that both the USB Type-C and the HDMI on the back is connected to the dedicated GPU, which is the way it should be. And around the sides, you're getting a Thunderbolt. I kind of wish the Thunderbolt was at the back. It just would have made things a little bit tidier. USB Type A and another USB Type A at the back. And what I love about Lenovo laptops is they have a physical switch for the camera, and this turns it off in hardware. So there's no way for it to be turned on remotely. Really handy headphone jack. And that's pretty much it. So opening up the lid is incredibly easy. The screen does open up all the way back. So here's the thing though, the entire laptop is really well made, but the keyboard deck is made out of plastic, and it doesn't feel as high quality of a plastic. There's been some people complaining about keyboard flex, but in reality, there isn't really any, at least none that I'm able to detect here. But what I did notice is the keyboard itself, when you press down the keys, it ends up pressing down several keys next to it. It could appear that there's keyboard flex. That was a big issue last year, but it doesn't seem like that's an issue with this year's model. So that's something that's definitely resolved. If you do want better build quality throughout, then you have to go with the Legion 9. But I've had a lot of issues with that. I bought it and I used it for like 45 days. And I just decided not to do a review on it because I just wasn't a fan of it. For the Legion 9, they chose thinness above everything else. So because of that, the keyboard was pushed forward and the trackpad ended up being tiny, and I just could never get accustomed to typing on it. And on top of that, there was just a whole bunch of different bugs with it. I don't know if it's been resolved. If you have a Legion 9, let me know, because I got a lot of comments asking me about different types of bugs that they were experiencing with the Legion 9, and at that time, it was not resolved. Let me know in the comments if you have a Legion 9 and if you're still experiencing issues with it. But anyway, back to this Legion 7, which I think overall is a better decision to make over the Legion 9. So I know I kind of went on a little bit of a rant about plastic on the chassis, but also at the same time, because of that, the keyboard deck area never really gets hot under load. One thing with plastic though is it will start to show its age a little bit faster than if it was metal. And speaking of which, the trackpad is also plastic, and for some reason, I don't know if this is just a coincidence, but I found that every plastic trackpad just tend to be more responsive and they just glide better than glass trackpads. I don't know if this is just a coincidence, but that's just kind of what I found. So one of the best trackpads out there. It's incredibly fast. Seems like the polling rate is sufficiently high enough to where it's very precise to use if you wanted to use this for professional applications. Definitely one of the best trackpads out there. Keyboard too, I've said this for years. Lenovo has one of the best keyboards out there. There's been a lot of catch up with the competition, and there's a lot of good keyboards out there from other laptops, but there's something about Lenovo, they just know how to do it right. It's hard to really put my finger on it, well, I guess like literally, but something about the spacing is just right. The size of the actual keycaps are large enough too. There's the right amount of actuation force to press your keys to where you're barely getting any accidental typings. It feels premium. Good amount of travel. Spring back up is really nice too. There's just a whole bunch of little things that just adds up to this being one of the best keyboards out there. Another thing I like, even though this is a regular 16-inch laptop, you're getting a full number pad with a lot of space. So overall, Lenovo just knocks the keyboards out the park. So the speakers, it's audio by Harman, which they have been using for a while, and the speakers are not bad. I would have said that they were above average, but in 2024, speakers have gotten really good, and now this is just about average. So it gets loud and there is good detail, but it doesn't have the bass and it doesn't have the clarity that some of the other top-end 2024 laptops has, but overall more than serviceable. And one thing I want to touch on quickly is the RGB, which is important for a gaming laptop. Lenovo does it among the best. The keyboard lighting is really bright, it's not too intrusive. The controls to adjust it is very easy too, just by hitting function up and down. You can toggle between different effects by pressing function and space. And I love the lighting in the front here. I do wish it went all the way around the way the Legion 9 does, but it does create a really nice ambient light strip on the desk that it's resting on too, and it does a good job of being elegant without being overly done. But here's the best part though, because these effects is built right into the firmware, not into the software like Lenovo Vantage, or if you've used other gaming laptops where you have to go into the software to enable it. And when you close the software, the lighting effects goes back to its default. So you can control the keyboard lighting when you're in the BIOS, when you're in the boot up screen, etc. So it's much better to have it built into the firmware than have to have it rely on software. So that's a little extra step that Lenovo took that I don't see any other manufacturers doing. I think this is the better way to do it. But then you can also control everything in Lenovo Vantage software too, and it's a fairly deep and rich customization experience. Not as much as some of them out there like the Armory crates or the Razors, but more than good enough for most people. Alright, so let's talk about the display, and they use X-Rite Color Assistant, and there's different settings you can use based off of the workflow that you're doing. Adobe RGB is more for photography, DCI P3 is for watching movies, P3 is probably what you should be using most of the time. That's kind of what most laptop displays are tuned for these days. Rec 709, that's essentially sRGB, and you also have sRGB. I don't recommend those. Those are older standards right now, and they don't have as much of a color gamut as the rest of these. Default, I'm not really sure where that is, but then there's also not calibrated, which unlocks the full gamut of the display. So when I ran my measurements, that's what I use, and just the not calibrated display mode is incredibly accurate. So let's just get right into some of the numbers I got. So as you probably noticed already, that wasn't in last year or the previous year's Lenovo Legion laptops, and it's been my number one source of criticism of their displays is they did not support DCI-P3. It was locked to only 100% sRGB, and so you're missing out on a lot of colors. sRGB only supports 16.7 million colors, but DCI-P3 supports over 1 billion colors, so it does make a big difference, especially when it comes to gradients, HDR, etc. And this does support HDR, but unfortunately this screen is not an OLED, it doesn't have mini LEDs, so it doesn't have any type of variable backlighting or any type of way of getting a high contrast. So because of that, HDR for the most part is not really noticeable whether you turn it on or off. I've been just turning it on because it increases the brightness a bit and it does kind of increase the pop, but you're not getting anywhere of the experience that you will with an OLED or a mini LED panel. And I know that the Legion 9 panel does support HDR properly because it does have a mini LED panel, but I found that panel to be unusable for me because of the amount of flicker on it. But anyway, back to the Legion 7. Still a great panel though. Overall color accuracy is good. Gamma measured at 2.2, which is right. Brightness, lowest brightness is 7.1 nits, which is great because you could use this in low lighting situations. The only problem is though, is the keyboard lighting, even the lowest setting is still way too bright if you're using this in a completely dark room. It's like these little things that Lenovo just needs to tweak. But anyway, max brightness is 553 nits, which is one of the highest out there. But as a result, the black point ends up being 0.42. You want black point to be 0, obviously, if you're using like a mini LED or an OLED. But for a traditional IPS screen without any type of local dimming, 0.26 is where I usually like to be. So in completely dark rooms, I've been gaming at 75% brightness, and I think that gave me the best overall contrast to brightness ratio, especially because I'm already in a pitch dark room. But in bright rooms, 553 nits, more than awesome enough. The overall color accuracy in this not calibrated mode is really good too. But if you really did care about accuracy, you can just enable one of those profiles in the X-Rite software. Overall, it's a great screen. They finally caught up with a DCI-P3 panel, but also at the same time too, it's not an OLED panel and it's not a mini LED panel, so it doesn't get as bright and the contrast ratio isn't as infinite as OLED is. For a traditional IPS panel, this is a good one. Okay, so before we get into the performance, and this is kind of what I was hinting at when I started the video, I switched over to the ProArt P60, and it's made by ASUS, and it's using the new AMD Ryzen 9 AI chips with an RTX 4070 in it. And I know, big downgrade in some ways, but I've gotten used to having like a regular laptop now that will last anywhere between 4 to 8 hours, depending on how much I'm pushing it. Has a good sleep mode to where I can put it to sleep, and then when I turn it back on, it'll still have battery. And speaking of battery, I could only get 4 hours on the best day on this Legion 7. And when I'm using it the way I want, which is with the brightness on like 80% with the keyboard lighting on, only 2 hours. And I'm not even talking about like video editing or doing anything crazy on it, just regular browsing. Battery on these Core i9 HX chips is just horrendous because of the way that this architecture is designed. So for example, at idle, this is using 15 watts. Most modern laptops these days is only using 3 watts when on idle. So just do some math. You'll be able to see that there's no way you could get good battery on these traditional gaming laptop. That I always get comments asking, how's the battery, but it's going to be the same for all of these laptops. So like, just take a look here. When you're sitting idle, you are running at 15 watts, which doesn't sound so bad, but if you just barely do anything, you just move the mouse or you go to the recents mode with Windows, it goes up to 34, sometimes 40 watts. So this chip is rated to run Windows normally at 35 to 40 watts. So as a result, all of these i9 14900 HX chips, we'll see what happens next year in 2025 with those new chips, but they're kind of meant to be plugged in, and that's okay depending on what you need out of a laptop. So because of that, when you put this laptop to sleep, it needs to hibernate. If not, it's going to die every time you open it. And it still ends up dying. But because the way this chip is designed, though, you're getting way better performance than any of those other thin and light laptops out there. So let's just get right into that. So the first test that I did, and this is what I'm going to start doing with all my gaming laptops going forward, is a stress test. This is running the same benchmark, Steel Nomad in this case, 20 times sequentially to see if there's a dip in the performance between the first time you run it and the last time you run it, which is the 20th time. If there's thermal throttling going on, the first score and the last score will be substantially different. Thankfully, Lenovo passes. The score you get is very similar to what you get 20 minutes later, so the thermals are really good too. And that's what I've noticed when I was gaming with it. The CPU can go up to like 75, 80 watts, but then the temperatures never really exceed 80 or 82 degrees, which is pretty amazing for such a thin and light laptop, relatively speaking, for gaming laptops perspectives. The same with the GPU too. Temps are in the 70s and the GPU can push all the way up to 170, 75 watts. So the next test is 3D Mark CPU profile, and this is why it's still worthwhile getting a laptop like this. It still destroys just about everything else out there. And then same thing with 16 threads, all the way down to 1 thread is when it starts to perform very similar to the other ones. And now let's look at TimeSpy, everybody's favorite gaming benchmark. And it's pretty much holding its own with just about every other gaming laptop I've tested. It's even close to when I had the MSI Titan AT. And because I've tested so many gaming laptops, but just based off of these tests that I've done here, I know it's going to perform very well in every other game. So I'm just going to blast through the rest of these benchmarks so you can just kind of take a look to see what it's like. Feel free to pause. I've been testing more games than I have been last year or even earlier this year. So there might be some scores where you're not able to compare it to maybe specifically the laptop that you're looking at. But I'm doing this to take me into next year where the new 50 series laptops come out so I could compare how the 40 series does with the 50s and how the 14900HX compares to whatever the 50 series is, if they're even going to do that anymore. Intel is kind of going through a renaissance of how they build their chips. So I don't know what's going to be in the future, but as of right now, this is performing as good as some of the larger 18-inch laptops that I have. Manages to be a little bit quieter, and it's a much smaller and lighter package. So overall performance, this is great. And the best thing about Lenovo, man, they always have sales. So when I picked this up, this was like $3,000 after tax with a 4090. So if you're looking for a gaming laptop, I mean, I would say probably go with this one, but also at the same time, because we're so close to the end of the year, I don't know what the future's going to bring, when the new chips are going to come out. Typically, they get announced in January at CES, and then they start shipping in February, all the way up sometimes until April. So if you were looking for an upgrade, I don't know if I should tell you to wait or get something now. It just depends on the sale. So let me guys know what you think in the comments. I can't wait for 2025 to start checking out some new gaming laptops as they start to arrive. So get subscribed, and if you guys like this video, like it. If you want to see more of my other stuff, feel free to look at my other videos, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you guys. Bye.